Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about naming products because when you name a product, it's not just a label that you slap on a product, it's actually a declaration. So, what is naming a product a declaration of? You're declaring to customers, to the market, what it is that you want people to feel when they experience your product, what it is you want them to think about when they think about your product. Your product is one of the first motions, one of the first go to market motions you take in building a brand around something. And so what a lot of people do is they kind of get hung up on naming. There's this Goldilocks area of naming a product that you can find. Goldilocks being, just right. So when you're naming a product, a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of the founders and entrepreneurs that I talk to spend too much time on that process. They try and get it just perfect. The flip side is there are some who don't do enough research and take enough time when they name their product. And so from a Goldilocks perspective, you want to think about finding just the right amount of time to name your product. And how to do that, there are some universal principles that you can use when you name your product. So we're going to go over those universal principles for naming a product today in hopes that they help you if you're building a product. Maybe you already have a product and you're looking to rebrand it. These are some universal principles of naming products that I use when I'm naming products for the company I work for, or for the products I'm building for myself, or the clients that I'm consulting with. These are all universal principles that you can use regardless of the industry you're in and things like that. So we're going to talk about those today. The first one is that when you name your product, preferably it should be memorable. It should be something that when people say, it sort of sears into their brain what your product's name is and sticks with them for a long time, because for obvious reasons, whenever they're looking to buy again in that same category, they think of your product. I think of things like, I don't want to use the overly used things, but I think of stuff like Chobani. So that's the yogurt that I use in my overnight oats every morning. And it took me just a second to think about the name, but it is seared into my brain. Whenever I go to buy yogurt, I don't buy Oikos, I buy Chobani because that's the brand that I'm used to. That name is memorable enough for me. It's also pronounceable, which is the second thing you should think about when you name a product. It should be something that people could just generally across the globe can pronounce. Think about Google. That's pretty easy for just about anyone to say that sees it. So you want to think about people who may read your product name. If they have to think too hard about how to pronounce that name, it's just not an appropriate name for your product. And you don't want to just think about the locality that you're in, the geography you're in, because eventually you may expand. So you want to think about names that are memorable and pronounceable across the globe. It should be relevant. Now, it doesn't always have to be just exactly what the product is. For example, let's go back to the name Google. No one knew what Google was before Google became a thing, before they became a popular company, and the word Google basically became a verb for searching the internet. But if you can, you should name your product in a way that it's relevant with what the product is that you offer. So my company has a product that we're building that my team is responsible for. It's called Jack Henry Wires. So it's a wires platform where you send electronic wires from me to you or you to me, sending money along the way, right? That's not a surprise. When you say Jack Henry Wires, if you understand what a wire is, you immediately get it, right? So think about the ability to have a name that is relevant to what you're doing, those types of things. Now, also, another recommendation for universally acceptable practices for naming a product would be, is it distinctive, right? So product name should be as distinct as possible. One of the steps in naming a process is ensuring that that name is not used by your competition, is not used by someone who's even too close to your competition. It may not be a direct competitor, could be an indirect competitor. You should probably try and avoid that type of name. The other thing about a name being distinctive is it allows you to put trademarks on that name. And if you can't protect the name of your product with intellectual property like trademarks, you have some risk going on there. You could have reasonable confusion and those types of things. I'm actually consulting with a startup right now. Their name is Credentials. The first E, C-R-E, is actually a 3 in the name. And so they couldn't use the original spelling of Credentials, C-R-E. They used a 3 in there. And that made it distinctive and allowed them to use that word. Also, when it's distinctive like that, you have to think about the impact to social media. and digital assets. So for that team, probably the word credentials.com was taken. They went with the credentials with 3 and .xyz. They could have done a .io for tech or something like that. So thinking about all of these things being distinctive, and one of the reasons you want that and to focus your energy there when naming your product is because you want to be able to get the URL that's associated that is the best use for your product. Also social media avatar names and profile names and things like that. So another thing for universal practice is you want a name that's scalable. So imagine if Amazon had used the word books at the end, Amazon books, if they just said that. When they started to expand, books was where they originally started, but when they started to expand outside of books, it would have made it challenging, right? When you started to offer, I don't know, bug out packs, things that I buy, and knives and kitchen utensils and all these things, Amazon books wouldn't have made sense. They would have to have gone through a whole rebrand. And if they'd have bought amazonbooks.com, they couldn't have expanded. The brand name, the product name was not expandable and scalable. So that's something else you should really think about. And the last recommendation is to think about it being a global product name. So one of the first things I do when I'm naming a product is I take that product name and I search for it in well-known other languages. And if your product name translates into a bad name, a bad product name in another culture, and you're going to be global, you're going to have to avoid that name. You also not only need to think about the implications of names in other countries, but you have to think about this idea of cultures, other cultures. So if there's a bad implication of something in another culture, then you want to avoid that as well. So let's go back over those, and then we're going to talk about some other naming conventions. You want it memorable, pronounceable, relevant, distinctive, scalable, and global. Okay, you want to think about all those things. Now, there's some other naming conventions you have to think about. Naming doesn't just apply to your product's name itself. You also want to think about things that are associated with your product, like features and pricing tiers. So in software as a service that I'm familiar with building and some of the products that I'm building today, when you have software as a service, you usually have 3-tier pricing models. And a lot of times we call those freemium. So the first tier is absolutely free, but then the last tier is premium. So freemium, combining those together. Well, if they call that cheapium, it wouldn't make any sense, right? It's just not a good name. So you have to think about how you do those things. Look at QuickBooks as a great example of things. Another naming convention, which is functionality. So quick, fast, books, bookkeeping. Those two made a lot of sense together. So some other naming things you need to think about is how you name your pricing tiers. If you call it standard, right? Or do you call it premium? There's tricks you can play there with naming conventions. So some things to think about. We've also already talked about trademarks and those types of things. Let me now run you through just the quick steps I go through when I'm naming a product, and I hope these help you. The first is define the product's vision, mission, and values. All those things will lead you to a name. Conduct your market and competitor research. That'll help you avoid challenges around the global issue. Brainstorm your options. Then take those brainstorm options and screen out some of them with stakeholders. So existing customers, see what they think. Your CEO, your CFO, people in your company, other stakeholders. Talk to them and see what they think about them. Then we reduce our options down to the top 3 to 5. And from there, we perform our legal and digital checks on the options. And I also do this in my own personal products. So if I have a product, I get down to the top 3 to 5 names, and then I will go see if the URL I want is available. So preferably a .com, but I do use a few others like .io. And I will then go see if I can trademark the name. So when I was developing my principle called the bookends of product management, when I was thinking about what I was going to call that, I went out and searched if that was something I was going to be able to trademark. Sure enough, it was, and so I ran with it. And then the last thing where a lot of people go wrong with names is they pick a name and they consider their work done. They never revisit it. You should test names of products with your market. You could put out the product, especially if it's early on, under one name, and then put it on another marketplace. Let's say you're selling books. Let's say you're selling books, and you have one name of the title, and you put it on Amazon, and you have another name of the same book with a different title, and you put it on Gumroad. And of course, one gets more traffic than the others. But setting that aside, you could sort of gauge which name seems to do better with the target market that you're thinking about. So naming conventions are very important. There's a few ways you can think about them. I share with you a process and 5 or 6 different things you should think about. What I want to leave you with is just what I talked about in the very beginning, which is to not get stuck on naming. If you're taking too long to get your product into the market simply because you're trying to get the name just right, it's probably not a good thing. The flip side, it's not a good thing, is if you're just randomly picking a name that no one can pronounce, isn't memorable, no one understands, it's not scalable, you can't take it global. All of those factors, you have to find the right zone with naming. So I recommend just following my process. Get your top 3 to 5, do your research, make sure they're not taken or used elsewhere, competitors are using them, all these different things. But when you get one, go ahead and start building, because at the end of the day, a lot of successful products are out there that people never knew what the heck they were. No one knew what a Coca-Cola was, right? And now all of a sudden it's, I guess, still, or one of the top selling soda brands in the world. No one knew what Google was. No one knew how the word Apple had anything to do with computers and or cell phones, right? So you don't always have to get a name perfectly right, but there are some universal best practices that you should think about. I hope that helps. I'll talk to you next time.